there's a ton of noise out there. So how do you get decision makers to pay attention to your brand? Start a podcast and invite your ideal clients to be guests on your show. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to B2B Growth. I'm your host for today's episode, Nikki Ivy, and I've got for you today Elle Woulfe, who is VP of Marketing at PathFactory, and Matt Heinz, President of Heinz Marketing. And they're going to be talking to us about some really interesting research they did on the buyer's journey for CMOs. And I'm super excited to get into that. But before we do, Elle, you first, and then we'll kick it to Matt. Just go ahead and give us a little bit of background on yourselves, your work, and what you've each been up to these days.
Sure. Well, thanks for having us. So I'm the VP of Marketing at PathFactory. We used to be called Lookbook HQ. We rebranded about a year ago, last May. And we're a content insight and activation platform. So we help B2B companies deliver a much more sort of on-demand experience with content and information to help buyers, find and consume that information and move through the buyer's journey faster. My background, I obviously did a big rebranding project recently, but my background is actually in demand generation. I've spent more years than I'd like to admit in MarTech, working at Eloqua and Lattice Engines, all kind of in demand gen roles. So been cooking for chefs for quite a long time. PathFactory is a Toronto-based company, and I actually sit just outside of Boston, Massachusetts, which of course all the Toronto Maple Leafs fans really like these days. But that's it. And yeah, excited to be here and talk about some of the research that we did with Heinz Marketing.
Thanks so much. How about you, Matt?
Well, first of all, condolences to all Boston Bruins fans. I was watching Saturday night double overtime game in Game 7. Exciting, but not the results they were probably looking for. But yeah, my name is Matt Heinz. I run a company called Heinz Marketing. We help B2B companies build more predictable sales pipelines, where a lot of companies, when they're doing demand generation and building their sales pipelines, there's often lumpiness and sometimes random acts of sales and marketing that fit into that. So we help those companies smooth that out and create more predictable, repeatable, and scalable sales pipeline moving forward. And a key part of that, Nikki, is understanding your audience and understanding the people you're selling to. And I think that's, maybe a nice way to segue into talking about the research that we did recently with PathFactory around how CMOs engage and buy in the sales process.
It is a nice way to segue. You're going to take my job. So this is what you guys did, right? You interviewed over 200 senior directors, SVPs and VPs and CMOs to find out how they engage with the buyer's journey. Because as you said, understanding, what your peers are doing is what's going to give you the ability to change and improve and sort of raise the bar as that's concerned. But let's start off with why. Why is it so important for marketing leaders to understand how their peers make these purchasing decisions?
Yeah, I think, the key to any effective sales and marketing is understanding who you're selling into. And increasingly with larger, more complex buying processes and larger organizations, there isn't one buyer, there's a buying committee. And that buying committee is made up of people with different roles, different responsibilities. And what we found is that it also includes people that are involved and not involved at different stages of the buying process. So, take the CMO, for example. If you're selling into a marketing department, the CMO is clearly an important person, but what is their role at each stage of the buying journey? What's their role in defining what the priorities are in sort of the agenda for the year? What's their role in justifying a decision and completing a decision-making process? What's their role in the middle, if there is one? And if not, who else plays that role? So I think understanding who's involved and what their role is helps you map out how to sell into those organizations.
Yeah, that was one of the things that stood out to me. It was like, so they're the ones who are initiating, and then they're the ones who are the decision makers. But then a lot of this that happens in the middle, right? Your exploratory stuff, going through demos, the nitty gritty was not up to them. I thought that was one of the key findings when I took a look at the research. But there was a lot there. One of the other things that stood out was this idea that marketers say that content is playing a huge role in the way that they make the decisions, but the way that they're being marketed to, the content isn't always actually relevant to them. So, Elle, did you maybe want to talk about why you think that disconnect exists?
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, one thing I'll say is that, and anyone who's made, this holds true, I think, in your B2C life as well. But anyone who's bought something expensive, you do research, right? You do research, and the stakes are particularly high when you're buying something, in your job. And you do that research to mitigate your risk and to feel confident in your decision. And so there's a lot of different types of information that people need to consume to sort of check all those boxes and move through that process. And so I think, one of the challenges is really actually in how we've distributed the content. I mean, I think marketers for a long time have been trying to create all the content and make sure they're checking all the boxes. Like, all right, we need something that talks about this and this and this. And, they're kind of aware of what information will my buyer need to move through. I think what's really hard is how do you make sure that right information gets surfaced to that person at the right time? And, to Matt's point, it's not just in this case about the CMO, it's about all the people who come to bear on a purchase decision, these large buying committees. There's an infinite number of buyer's journeys out there, right? Even in one organization, everybody's kind of starting with different contexts and different information and entering the process at different times, and they need different information. So I think it's been really hard for most marketing teams to try to orchestrate that experience on the other side. And I think CMOs kind of told us, like, I don't always find the information I'm looking for, or it's not relevant. I think also marketers tend to rely on their own content, right? The content they create. And if you think about the other stuff that people need to consume, things like, analyst reports or peer reviews or whatever, we kind of are leaving the buyer, in this case, the CMO, on their own trying to piece together all that information. So I think there's a lot of reasons why, the content isn't always relevant for the audience. And, I think despite our best efforts, even if we have created a lot of relevant content, it's just how, we're failing at connecting people with it in the right moments. I think the other thing is, while there's been some advancements in like how we've sort of personalized content for different audiences, it's pretty basic today, right? It's really sort of personalizing at that level of like, here's something for people like you. We know you're a CMO, so all CMOs must need this piece of content. And it sort of fails to, look at where is that person in the journey? What have they already consumed? So I think there's a lot of reasons why, buyers in general are just finding that, vendor content, while it's really important, it's not always relevant to the job they're trying to do in the moment.
Yeah, no, I think that makes perfect sense. And so once you guys and this research really did bring up a lot of those whys, what are some of the hows? Like, what are some ways that B2B marketers can close that gap to better enable marketing leaders to make those faster, smarter purchase decisions?
Yeah, well, I think one of the ways to do that very tactically is to allow the buyers and the various roles of the buyers to access the content they want at the time that they want it, right? I think that, a lot of times we try to orchestrate as marketers our drip campaigns based on what we think the buying journey looks like, but that drip campaign very rarely aligns with exactly the cadence of what kind of content prospects want to see. I mean, those drip campaigns tend to look like the way we watched TV 15 years ago, right? Like you watch something on Thursday at 8, and then you wait a week, and then you watch something on Thursday at 8, and then you wait a week. Well, what if I want to binge watch all of that? What if I'm so interested in this content, I want to see it all at once? Because that's how intense my buying journey is right now. So not only do you give the prospect the opportunity to really engage with, and see all the content they want, but that is a very clear buying signal to you as a seller that they're highly interested in something right now. And so, I think that it's a challenge to do, but I think we benefit when we give the prospect more control over what and when and how much content they want to see.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in and say, I mean, I think B2B marketing has largely been sort of a push mechanism to this point, right? You push a lot of stuff out there, typically on your own schedule, and you kind of hope that it connects with the right person at the right time. And so maybe 1% of the time that's going to happen. I think marketers need to start looking for better signals of sort of where the buyer is. I mean, if all we know is how people are clicking on stuff or if they're filling out forms, we're missing a big important signal, which is how are they consuming it? Where, like, is that a quality interaction we just had? I mean, the reason why Netflix or Amazon or any of these on-demand services can deliver these hyper-personalized, experiences because they know everything about how you're engaging on their platform. It's behavioral, right? It's not just about, you live in the zip code or, you're married with 2 kids. It's about, and you bought this thing last Thursday, you shopped for these 4 things, but didn't purchase them. You came back and looked at them again. You watched, you binge watched Game of Thrones all the way through. And that's the information that they use to personalize the experience for you. So I think, when it comes to how we try to connect with the right buyer at the right time with the right piece of information, it's got to begin with, do we actually know what they've consumed? I mean, until you know where they are, you won't know the next best thing we should deliver to them. I think that's a big part of it. And then, to Matt's point, I mean, again, even think about something that, you might have bought in your own personal life, be it a car or a computer or something like that. You don't go and research the safety features of the car one day and then wait a week and, come back and look at financing options. When you're doing research for anything that's important, you want to consume a lot of information at once, right? So the mechanism and the schedule by which I think B2B marketing has largely been structured is just a little antiquated in terms of how buyers actually want to consume content today.
Today's growth story is all about search engine marketing. The company we're highlighting is SentinelOne. This challenger cybersecurity brand was set out to disrupt the endpoint protection space. Their brand was top-notch, their product was innovative, but they were struggling to gain traction online in an already developed industry. Then they found Directive Consulting, a B2B search marketing agency. Within the first quarter of working with Directive, SentinelOne was able to increase their organic traffic by 128% and overall lead volume by an outstanding 251%. Now, I have a hunch that Directive can get these kind of results for you too. So head over to directiveconsulting.com and request a totally free custom proposal. That's directiveconsulting.com. All right, let's get back to this interview.
Absolutely. I mean, the way that a lot of this research that you guys did on this particular journey, the way that it parallels so many other, journeys in, that go down in B2B, specifically this thirst for content when you're researching. I know that when I was researching my next role, right, as an employee, that's what I was looking for. I would get a job description and then go and try and find every single thing that I could about that company. And to your point, as far as the content that's available, if I was able to, binge, as you guys put it, on, do they have podcasts out there? Do they have this kind of media out there? Every single kind, all the different types and formats and channels available, the more of those that there were, the more likely I was to continue down that path in pursuing whatever I was pursuing. And it sounds like you guys had some interesting stats from the research that came out to that point about the thirst for third-party reviews and analyst reports and the idea of collecting the right kind of data to understand what resonates at various stages in the buyer's journey.
And I'll go back to what you asked, initially about sort of why we did this. I mean, I do think like a big part of this is just human psychology, right? As the mind and the experience of the, B2B CMO, so goes, kind of the rest of the world. Like, I just think there's an element of this. And I think that's a bit of what we wanted to expose. Like, listen, marketing executives, if you're having a hard time navigating this buyer's journey, connecting with the right information, finding relevancy or whatever, a marketer was on the other end of that, creating that experience, right? And so you need to stop and think, oh my gosh, like, are we doing the best that we can for our buyer? I think marketing has been so much about, again, just marketing at, that buyer, as opposed to really like, how do I enable that buyer to get all the things they need and to move quickly and to make it easy? And that's why I like to, use those examples of these kind of on-demand services, because what they excel at is delivering an experience that is frictionless, right? You don't have to hunt around. They pick you up where you left off. You show up and they say, hey, you just finished watching this thing. Would you like to watch more? How about these 3 things that seem like they'd be things you'd like? So you're not left trying to find the next best thing. They're telling you what it is. And that removes a lot of time and friction and aggravation for the buyer. So I think that was a big part of what I was hoping to do, is just kind of impress upon marketers that if you're struggling with this, chances are your buyer is too.
Right. It's so meta, which is a phrase we use around here all the time at Sweetfish, but it's like you were thought leaders teaching people how to be thought leaders and engage with thought leaders and just sort of create this whole little ecosystem of it. And you're so right. It starts with marketers. And so what I'm wondering about you, Elle, is because I know we were sort of talking offline about this question of how am I engaging in this process and how does that compare to what my peers are doing. What were some of the things, if any, that you found that were surprisingly dissimilar from the way that you engage in the journey versus, some of what you found in the research?
One of the things we found was that I think a lot of marketing executives are pretty involved in the buying process, both at the beginning and the end. I think I tend to be more involved at the end, unless it's something I've brought forward. I mean, every once in a while I fall in love with something and I go, tell my team, like, we need to go check this out. Like, this is going to be the next great thing that we do or we buy or whatever. In which case, I am pretty involved at the beginning. But a lot of times, and again, I'm a growth stage company, relatively small team, 10, 12, 11, 12 people now, I guess. Gets bigger every day. But, a lot of times they are finding things out there that will make their lives easier, will help us, solve a problem, that will help us meet a goal. And they're bringing those ideas to me. And in those cases, to be honest with you, they run with it. I say, go check it out. Go, look at 3 solutions. At the point where you kind of have to whittle it down and you decide it's something we want to pursue, then I get involved. So I did find like I tend to be a little less involved in the outset, and I think more involved in the end. And I think, the research told us a lot of marketing executives are more involved both at the beginning and the end.
Yeah, that's interesting. Matt, what surprised you about this research?
What surprised me, honestly, was this inverse bell curve we saw with the CMO's involvement, that we saw them heavily involved at the beginning, heavily involved at the end, but then kind of going away during the research phase. And I think that what's interesting with a lot of people that sell is I think there's still amongst a lot of enterprise sellers this expectation that you go and sell to the very important top person. There's a book called Selling to Vito, very important top officer, that says you go to the top. And I think that may be where you start, but that may be where the decisions are made ultimately. But if you do that, you tend not to be respecting the organizational structure. You tend to frustrate those that are in the middle of the organization that are doing some of the research and due diligence. And so I think what we found through this is that if you're looking to get onto someone's agenda, if you're looking to impress and really stand out as a respectful seller, you go to those that are helping to make the decisions in the middle. You go to those that are doing the due diligence. You help them be the champion and the hero internally to bring the idea to their boss. It may feel like an indirect way of getting the sale, but sometimes 3 steps is faster than 1. And by understanding how that buying process works, you end up getting greater acceleration towards the result you really want.
For sure. And again, that's just another example of how valuable this study and this research is, whether you're a marketer or not. It's just that thing that you just hit on where it is. And I've been an individual contributor in a lot of these environments. And it's just like, get to the DM, get to the DM, get to the DM. And, you see folks treating, the so-called gatekeeper, like just something to get through, and not as a human who is a real meaningful part of this buying process, or the folks who are evaluating in healthcare. And that's where what you're talking about really does come alive. It's like the first person I might have dealt with in those situations would be, say, a nurse administrator who is the one who is using and therefore evaluating the solution. But at that time was pressure from my leadership to get to the person who's going to say yes or no on the buy. And this research, I think, is really helpful to arm even individual contributors with who are salespeople to understand and say, hey, wait a minute, there's something to yes, personalization and understanding that, like you said, it's not always, get to this top person in order to make things happen. In fact, what the data says is it's usually not that to begin with. So again, it's just super valuable stuff.
But think about the implications of that, though. I mean, again, like with these big buying committees, and to Matt's point, that, okay, so maybe you started dealing with a senior executive, and I think this holds true whether you sell to marketers or whoever you sell to, maybe
Sure.
you started talking to the CFO or the CEO or whatever. And at some point down the line, you're going to be talking to a couple of people who aren't that person. And the reality is, like, what those people in the middle want to know is pretty different than what that person at the top wants to know. And so, I mean, it's not just the domain of marketing to try to solve some of this and deal with the relevancy and the personalization. It's also the domain of sales, the salespeople, to, be treating those buyers like the people that they are, because they do have individual needs and, requirements as they, we sell to a couple different personas, we sell to marketers, but they're different personas. And
Sure.
someone who, runs a demand gen team wants to know something very different than someone who owns the corporate website. And we, if we try to engage with those buyers and communicate with those buyers in exactly the same way, we're going to miss the mark a lot of the time because we're not telling them the thing that's important to them.
Yeah, I think what you guys are describing, I think, or what we're really talking about here is the bridge between, marketing and sales, and how coming together on understanding these ideas here is really key in that alignment that eludes a lot of organizations, right? And because in there, I would, I think alignment stops short. I think I always talk about sort of sales and marketing harmony. Folks have heard me say this a lot. I think it should be a much closer relationship than simply having aligned goals. I think it should be like an aligned passion and aligned mission, and understanding that we are all sort of here for the same reason, and a mutual respect for what each other is doing. And even in my experience, I mean, I'm a salesperson, but I've seen it where it's easier. It seems easier or marketers have been more, I'm going to get in trouble, have been more vocal about, or more articulate about their understanding for, what they do for a sales organization than salespeople tend to be about what, how what they do is affected by what marketers do. And so I think this is really important, yes, for marketers to understand, but maybe even more for salespeople to understand the very critical role that this kind of stuff plays in what we as salespeople are trying to accomplish. So thank you guys for this research. And before we go, I just kind of wanted to get from each of you anything that we haven't gone over here that you think, whether it's marketers, salespeople, or B2B organizations overall, that you think folks should take away from this that they can apply today to start, doing better at this stuff. I'll start with you, Elle.
Oh, it's a great question. I mean, there's so many sort of lessons to be learned here. I mean, I think one thing, and I see this not just with the research we did, but in a lot of research about, engaging with buyers and communicating with them. I mean, all formats, all types of content, all of this stuff is important. There's no sort of one silver bullet in terms of the thing your buyer needs. They sort of need all of it. And to keep in mind that not all that content is stuff that you created. It might live in other places. So how can you find ways to wrap your marketing around it? I think that was kind of an important thing. If you want to remove friction from the buyer's journey and you want to make it easier for your buyer to, look, the reality is this research is going to happen independent of you. This is the way the world works today. Your buyer's going to go out there, they're going to do the research, and they're going to complete a large part of the buying process before they ever get to you. And marketers are no different. They do the same thing. And I think it's like, okay, then how can we make that as easy as possible? And that's, not just delivering the stuff we made for you, but the other stuff you might be looking for, finding ways to surface that, whether that's somebody coming to your website or clicking through on an email or whatever. And I do think, again, remembering that, your schedule as a marketer is not the same schedule as the buyer, right? The buyer is busy and they have a lot of stuff that they want to do. And so when they're ready to, do that research and consume information, how can you package related content, make it as, relevant and easy for them as possible. So I don't think this is stuff that people haven't heard before. It's just a good reminder, especially as I said, because if we as marketing leaders are experiencing these problems on the other end of someone else's marketing, we need to take a hard look on the experience that we're delivering to our own buyers and make sure that, we're not giving them a similar experience that's full of friction and holes and hard to navigate.
Certainly. I don't think there's too many times that you can emphasize that kind of message, right? That this taking your self-interest out of it and taking a look at what the buyer's experience is. That's something that gets talked about a lot, but it can't be talked about too much. How about you, Matt?
Well, I mean, a lot of what Elle said, I would certainly reinforce. And I also think, just if you like what you're hearing here and want to get some more specifics around it, definitely go to, PathFactory.com, get a copy of the research that we did. You get a lot more of the stats and sort of the highlights behind it. So really good reinforcement to take back to your marketing team, back to your content team, even to your sales team to understand, what we saw from CMOs, I have seen echoed with a lot of other senior buyers as well. So even if you're selling to another member of the C-suite, I think this research has a lot of echoes and a lot of comparables that are going to be important for you to check out.
Yes. So folks, go and read this research as a webinar that's available as well. It's very clear, concise. The methodology is laid out as well. And like it's been said, it's good stuff for marketing teams, sales teams, anybody who is in the B2B space, to be honest. Elle, how can folks connect with you and follow along with you if they're wanting to, sort of get more information about what you do and what your research is and what PathFactory is up to?
Sure. You can always follow us on all social media channels. We know marketers are pretty engaged on social channels, so we tend to try to engage them there as well. And that's LinkedIn. You can find us at PathFactory on Twitter. My Twitter handle is Elle Woulfe, and I am less active than I probably should be there. But you can always visit pathfactory.com. And as Matt said, there's copies of the research there that you can easily just kind of check out. And you don't even probably have to fill out a form to do that. That's how frictionless we want to make it for you. So yeah, you can definitely come check us out and get a little bit more detail on the study.
Thanks so much. How can folks find you, Matt?
You can find us at HeinzMarketing.com. That's Heinz like the ketchup marketing.com on Twitter. We are at Heinz Marketing, and I am just Matt, M-A-T-T, at HeinzMarketing.com if you want to send us email. And if you want to copy the research or want any more sort of insights into what we found with the CMO buying journey, would love to hear from you.
Good stuff, guys. Thank you so much. I can't wait for feedback from our listeners and for you guys to just be inundated with folks wanting more and more knowledge about what you guys found. Thanks so much, guys.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.